So we have a panel of experts here on standardization, and so we want to give everybody standardization. Right, it's this big topic, right? And what does it mean? And so hopefully, there are some things that you get. Somebody can stand up here and talk about standardization, and probably 80% of the content would be stuff you've heard before. And so I feel like today the objective is to listen to the conversation and find those things that are maybe a unique or something that triggers a thought that maybe even an old thought that we could reuse. So with that, we'll get started. So my name is Max Rector. I'm a business development manager focusing on test standardization. And what we're going to do is I'm going to let the guys do an introduction. We're going to start there. So
guys,
the y'all, forgive me. I'm from Indiana. I just say you guys. So we will start with your name, the company you're with, your title, and the year of your first test standardization, but not in the test, standardization project. So Nancy, would you start? And we have one mic, so.
All right, we're gonna figure that out. Okay, there we go. You guys got it? Okay, yeah. So the non-guy on the panel.
Yeah.
So I'm Nancy Henson. I'm with National Instruments. I've been with National Instruments off and on for 30 plus years. I'm in professional services, and I think my first standardization effort, not necessarily internal to NI, but working with my customers when I was in field sales, was a company called Exabyte in Boulder, and it was a LabVIEW test standardization before test stand was a thing, and that was probably 1994.
Hi, my name's Joe. I work for EI Electronics. We make smoke and carbon monoxide alarms. I'm a R&D automation engineer, and my first standardization project was probably late 2017.
Mike Davis. I'm a test architect with Raytheon Technologies, and my first standardization effort was probably circa 2007.
Hi, my name is Jim Carahan. I manage Averna's business in the West Coast. Averna is a company concentrating on test engineering solely. I'd say my first standardization project was around 2005 with LabVIEW.
Very good. And so, as I said, I'm Max Rector, business development manager with NI. And my first standardization project was 2008. And I'm going to start us with a story because I think it will open up to our first question. So the first time I heard about a standardization project, I was fresh out of college, and leadership had just learned about 5S. We had our 5S champions come back from training ready to put everything in a place and have a place for everything. I left on a Friday and came back on a Monday with my desk looking like a blue painter's tape version of my engineering graph paper. My wired, completely immobile desk phone was neatly placed inside of a blue painter's tape square. And then next to my desk was a 5S audit sheet showing the perfect score as it had been set up over the weekend. And I would be expected to maintain that going forward. 6 months later, as you can imagine, that sheet had about, I think, 4 audits in it. And then a new initiative had taken its place. I'm sure everyone in this room would have a similar story, or could if we go back. So I think, to me, I start there. We did not start with why. We didn't understand the why of standardization. So that's the first question. Why do we standardize tests?
So I would say, I come from a production background, and so our ultimate reason, why we standardize test is cost savings. Whether it's reducing touch labor, whether it's reducing system costs, quantities of systems that we have to purchase, whatever it is. Ultimate goal is to reduce cost of our products that we ship out the door, make more money for the company.
I suppose slightly different perspective from us. At the moment, we're experiencing such rapid growth. It's not so much a cost reduction exercise, but it's the only way we can duplicate our production cells at the rate that we need to maintain the market share that we have.
So I'm going to add on to the cost reduction. Vallejo Vision Systems is out of Tuam, Ireland, And that group went through a standardization effort led by Chris Forstall and Rob Carroll. And their intent at the beginning was the cost savings. Let's develop our own design validation testers and not outsource that. So we're going to save cost. The result was that, and they had happy engineers. Because as part of their standardization effort, the engineers weren't reinventing and doing a lot of manual work. And so the engineers loved going into work because they would go into work and they would do engineering. And when Robert presented on this at an NI Days, he specifically called out having happy engineers. And that's important for all of us because we're all challenged to hire engineers. And they are in Tuam, Ireland, and they did not have a whole lot of talent development near them. So the goal that they achieved, business objectives, and the goal of happy engineers and talent retention.
I'll add to that. I think cost and schedule are important. At Averna, we're about 400 people, and we often have to work with distributed engineering teams across the world. And I think the quality of the engineering output is enhanced when we standardize and spend the time to do that. So I think there's multiple benefits to it, and cost schedule being certainly some of them, but also quality of the work output, engineering output.
We had yesterday we had a similar panel that we did, or the same panel, a few different members, and one of the kind of tagging on with what Nancy you mentioned was that I liked. It was a phrase somebody said yesterday: unleashing the engineer to actually work on a problem that matters. Right. So by taking some of the development, specifically like you talked about. Developing infrastructure, right? That and sometimes we reinvent infrastructure. Instead, that engineer can be repurposed and working on stuff that actually matters, right? The device, the test, something new there that maybe hasn't been done before. So it's good. Create opportunities. So maybe from there, got a good reason, right? But where do we start, right? It's it can be daunting, right? Where do we start with standardization?
I think it all starts with the business objective up top, right? And translating that business objective to in our case, to engineering teams and operations. Having a clear objective of what we're trying to accomplish and looking at this as an activity that's going to be a continuous improvement activity. It's not necessarily going to be a finite, we start today, it ends in 6 months type of deal, but more having a longer-term play, longer-term vision, and continuously adding to that is a good place to start. But I think business objectives is a really good place to start what we're trying to accomplish.
I would also say that it's good to know who you are and what your pain points are, because ultimately I think that's the best place to start is where your pain points are and what can get you kind of the most return for your investment from an initial standardization effort.
And I suppose you have to have a common business goal. You have to get stakeholders from all departments. And like we've spoke about in the last few days, you have to be able to show a stakeholder from every department that you're going to fix a problem that they have currently.
So my snarky answer to that yesterday was start where you are. And I think that's been expressed. You start with, where you are, know what your pain points are, got to get your stakeholder buy-ins, and also know where you're headed. And so I just really, really want to emphasize stakeholder buy-in on your team and those other people who will touch your team, and getting their fingerprints on where you're headed.
Yeah, interestingly, you this was a different question, but you guys kind of answered it because when we think about standardization, we think about people, maybe different vectors of that, but the overarching theme is people, process, and technology. And I feel like you kind of addressed that, right, with the stakeholders, the team, the technology, like what are the pain points, and then the process, like what am I doing, or what's that long term kind of that's getting me towards that vision. So that's good. So maybe on that note, then, kind of talking about who do we start with? If you've got, maybe it's we go to the stakeholders first. Do you start with your team? Where do you start? Or with who?
We're going to start on this end this time. So there's a lot of, I hope we answer this in very different ways because there are a lot of different answers to that. What is important is when there is that team that is going to do that standardization, on that specific team, you've got to have the right leaders. And you need a technical thought leader, and you need a more of a people person who can sell the ideas both on the team and sell the ideas up. And so sometimes you can find an individual who is both a technical thought leader and someone who can socialize the message and work with the broader team. Sometimes that's two different people. So when I gave the illustration of Vallejo, we had Chris Forstall, we had Robert Carroll. I've seen it at other locations, two different people, sometimes one. But those are the kinds of leaders, thought leaders that you need on that team. And we're going to get some more guidance on some other ideas.
Yeah, I suppose you have to start with your own team just to form that singular vision of what your standardization is going to be. And then you have to start at the top. Mm-hmm. When you form that singular vision, you have to have top-down commitment. If you don't have that, it's an exercise in futility.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. I mean, I completely agree. I think that's the big thing we've seen is starting with, getting your team on board and starting with leadership who can really drive standardization. It doesn't happen organically, no matter how much we say we want it. I feel like it has to be, in our experience, it has to be driven. And you need someone who can do the technical, but then you also need somebody who can be that visionary and truly drive that solution.
Yeah, I don't really have too much to add to that. I mean, that's where it needs to start. And I think we also have to establish a pathway for information to get back up to the leaders and forming some sort of a feedback loop of helping us assess where we are. But yeah, I think it needs to start from the top and folks that are passionate about it and who will follow through and make sure that we're on the right pathway.
Yeah. So maybe a kind of the flip.
I got to add something to that.
Yeah, go for it.
I'm sorry, a thought just came to mind along those lines. And this is where I've seen standardizations go awry. And this is why it's so important to have that top-down leadership buy-in. There's many reasons why it's important. I have seen standardizations start and they make some really good progress. And then another manager comes in and everything falls apart. And then another manager comes in and everything falls apart a lot worse. And now we got a new management team and things are getting much, much, much better. And so within your organizations, be thinking about, if I'm leading the standardization effort with this group, when I move on, either laterally or upward in my organization, how do you really preserve the good stuff that we've built? I don't have an immediate answer, but it's just something that I've seen in multiple situations. And so when you do have someone who's like a VP level, then they can help preserve that. But just be cognizant that can happen.
Yeah, so that's actually another question is, why do standardization efforts fail, or why does standardization fail? In your guys' experience, when have you seen it fail and why?
Because it's hard. Is that a good answer?
It's good.
Because in our organization, we got hundreds of design engineers, each of them who do things differently. Each of them don't want to be engineers, right? Who want to go design something, who want to go develop something, who think their solution is the best solution. And they love standardization if you're going to standardize on their solution, right? So trying to bring a common vision to a large group of people is difficult. But I mean, that's where you and again, it kind of goes back to the driving it. It doesn't happen organically, right? You've got to have, you've got to create something that is usable, that is beneficial. But you're ultimately still going to have the visionary leadership that can drive it and really show the benefit of it.
I think sometimes we fall into this, there's a big challenge in the short term, right? If I ask anyone, nobody's going to say standardization is a bad idea, right? Everybody's going to agree. That sounds good. Let's do that. But there are situations where we get so focused on the short term. We got to get this project done. Forget about standardization. Let's just do it quick and dirty, right? And I think that's one of the reasons things fail. And I think it takes a little bit of a vision that holds you grounded, and the discipline to kind of work through that, and don't let the whole effort just go to waste, and continue on.
Yeah, I think, like you had said already, like we'd all like to think standardization just happens easily and organically, but it doesn't. So I think a big thing that we have to consider is that standardization can fail because we box ourselves in. We decide we're going to standardize on the cheapest platform we can find. We don't plan correctly. And there has to be a serious effort to plan in the beginning before you do anything. Because, like the title of the panel here, you have to have a holistic view of standardization. Isn't let's just all use the same box instrument. Mm-hmm. Let's use the same software. Let's use the same processes. So it fails, I think, because people don't take a step back and look at the bigger picture.
So I'm going to add two things, and hopefully, Todd, I got your quote correct. The longest distance between 2 points is a shortcut. So Todd from Crane, raise your hand. This is his famous quote, not copyrighted, but I'm going to always give credit. And that gets to exactly what you were saying, Joseph, is, just because it's the cheaper box does not mean that it's the right way to go. And so we cannot take shortcuts in standardization. Maybe we have to get some things out the door quickly and see the value, but the shortcuts are definitely not going to help us there. And then I also like what Mike said, why do standardization efforts fail? Because they're hard. And the thought that came to mind when you said that is, for those of us that are old, we might not have witnessed, but we're at least familiar with the JFK speech, the Go to the Moon speech. So you can go Google it. And we do these things because they are hard. And so it's important to have someone who's kind of steely and kind of determined and loves a huge challenge as part of your standardization team.
That's good. Yeah, one thing that I took away yesterday, and I feel like it kind of was there as well, is like in the case of hardware, right, where we're drawing maybe too small of a box around standardization, right? We're just trying to say, well, we're going to start here. And so you need that balance, but you can also get too focused on the vision as well and never do anything either, right? And so I think that there's a delicate balance between the two. Mm-hmm. So I guess maybe a question too, like how many, if you're putting together, you've got this vision of standardization, like how many of these projects can happen? Or have you seen, maybe the similar question is like, has standardization gotten larger over time? I mean, how has standardization evolved, would you say, since those first projects? And from that, how many can you actually do? Is one, I'm going
to give a quick answer that you already gave the answer to your question. Or you gave my answer to your question. Yeah. If we're going to do a standardization effort, I mean, there's a couple pieces to it. What's my current state, which we already talked about? Have a vision for your future state. Write that down. And we're all here going to these sessions and our minds are kind of getting blown up about the vision of where we can actually go. And then you start mapping out what are the different projects over the next few years that I need to make sure take place before I get there, or in order to get there. And so then I might have my initial project is something tangible that can deliver value immediately. I tightly scope it. And at the same time, I may send a few of my creative people off to go explore some of the future stuff and do a de-risking activity to do a demo or a proof of concept. I'm going to throw away the code. I'm going to throw away everything. But I want to go explore a few things to de-risk some of the future stuff. So it's deliver something tangible of value today and start working on the future.
Yeah, I think you kind of have two projects. Ideally, in our own industry, we have a standardization project, which is something that we're trying to do, but we still have to support some legacy devices. And then we have a longer term, the vision. So if we break down all the barriers and we have no constraints, and we're starting from scratch, what can we do? How fast can we build things? How much can we improve quality? All of that.
Sorry. So just adding further onto that, I think I completely agree with all that, right? Having an objective, figuring out where your pain points are, starting working on those things to get you towards that objective. But then, another, buzzword, be agile, right? Let's take on, when new things come up, right? Standardization doesn't happen overnight. It's going to be years. When things come up, when we start talking digital thread and digital twins, stuff like that. Okay, what steps can I take to continue to adapt these new things? Now that I'm talking data, right? 10 years ago, I wasn't thinking about data when we were talking standardization. We were hardware standardization, maybe software. But now that data is part of that realm, how can we start incorporating, working on projects that involve data, that give me my return on investment, that still are leading me towards that ultimate objective?
Only thing I'm going to add to that, I think organizations also have to learn how to standardize, right? Beyond just what we're standardizing, the process of standardizing and communication within the organization of how to actually put together a new standard. And having some, I want to stress communication there, because we're not just standardizing for things that have happened in the past or standardizing old solutions into a standard solution, but in the future. So there's got to be some communication where we see what's coming down the pipe, maybe 2 years from now, 5 years from now, maybe even longer. That's what I would add to that.
So maybe a question that, Mike, you touched on this, and we didn't talk about this yesterday, but it came up yesterday. So I think Marvin said it, that just the opportunity that standardizing data has become kind of a new, or he said it yesterday, there was a lower lift, I think, than what than maybe was expected. If you look back, the concept of doing it was foreign, and now it's become maybe a bit more a place to start. Can anybody speak into that? That was not on the pre-list, so.
I'll go for it if nobody wants to. Or go for it, Joyce.
I suppose now that we're logging virtually everything we do, before you start to standardize, you have 50 different developers logging in 50 different formats the way they want to read it when they take down the log file. Data is no use to anyone unless it's translated into tangible information. It's key just to find a standard format to log that so you can visualize it, so you can make actionable decisions on it.
That's good.
So I think there's another angle on data too. And when we were previously talking about the barriers to standardization, my snarky comment there was egos. And Mike touched on that as well. So if we're looking at standardization efforts, there may be a company and there may be multiple individuals or multiple teams, and they have their test software running on their tester. And like you said, their solution is the best solution. I know my solution is better than anybody else's. In this room, we could probably come up with 300 good solutions. But a lot of us haven't tackled the data and cloud solutions. This is all new to us. And so what we could do from a standardization effort is get the engineers that may bicker on the best test software stack and put us together to solve a problem together collectively, which would be some of the data problems. So that might be a way to drive some alignment and team camaraderie as a first step in standardization.
I feel like this is different because you guys have the mic. Did anybody want to add to that or no?
These guys are pretty smart.
Yeah. So we are going to open up, I think, again, learning from each other and kind of treating it that way. So we're going to open up questions for the group here in a minute, but before that, so be thinking of questions. One that came up yesterday from the group discussion I thought was good is, so we talked about standardizing, but what about maintaining a standard? Can anybody speak to that?
I think maintaining it requires some measurement, right? How do you, when we're talking about standardization, we're talking about reuse. So maybe there are ways that we need to look for how do we actually measure how much we're leaning into our standards that we developed, and coming up with new objectives or objectives that grow out of what we've learned. I think just like there was a stakeholder that was needed to start to kick the whole thing off, like we talked about. There's also some, I don't want to use the word police, but what's a better word to use than a police? Somebody that checks and communicates back and says, well, this is the status of things. This is the state of the union. And these are the things that we need to do to continue on this effort.
Yeah, I mean, I think maintenance requires buy-in, right? We have to continue to get buy-in and to so how do we, show? We have to continue to show return, I guess, is the big thing, right? It is metrics, right? How are we continuing to show the benefit of this and to keep that momentum going? Because in general, I mean, from our perspective, right, when we start these standardizations, I can't come and say, okay, everybody across our entire organization, this is the way we do it now. And that's not the way. So it's by finding the early adopters, getting them on board, showing that we can get return by doing this, and then continuing to show that benefit to others as we continue to kind of grow that out into a more true standardization.
I think it's important as well at the start to kind of clearly define responsibilities to stakeholders. You can find at the end of a project that everyone's finished, they all wash their hands of it, and the project manager is kind of left to maintain it. Mm-hmm. So you have to give ownership to everyone that was in the team and divide up the functions of maintaining that standard that way.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm going to take a slightly different view. I think it's okay to have a cop who is policing the new process from time to time. It depends on the situation. And we had new processes in our team, and my manager, he was the cop. And every time I sat down for my one-to-one with my manager, I was like, oh, darn, I got to do all these things that I didn't do this week, because if I don't, he's going to ask me about, have you done this and what's this? And so he trained us. And as part of the adoption, he made sure that we started doing these things, and instead of them being drudgery, they became habit. And he put processes in place to help us as well. So sometimes it's okay to have the process cop out there.
Actually, I feel like Nancy, there's the other thing you said yesterday, which I want you to share now, that I think in sustaining it, right? You mentioned, I'm going to let you say, because it's your phrase, about people don't tear down.
Oh, yeah. There's a phrase that we were doing a standardization closed door, and the facilitator, his quote was, people don't tear down what they helped build. And so when you get the involvement from your team and they're helping define things, their voices are heard. And when my voice is heard, when we're building out a new process, I'm more empowered, and I don't want to tear it down. And I've been on both sides of the fence. I've been where there was a new process and it kind of came down from on high, and it's like, we're like, what is that? And then on the flip side, we've been involved for, let's get everybody's voice. And I know that here was in our new process, here's this one thing that I think is really important in our new process. And then when I hear it makes the final process, it's like, great, I was heard, I feel valued, and I'm bought into this.
So if I had put my own painter's tape around my phone, then I would have been more likely to follow that. Okay. So we're going to open it up to the group now. If anybody has a question for our experts up here, now's your time. And so, we haven't been with the mic. We don't have a writer. Do we have a wireless mic? All right. Sorry, I'll make you talk loud.
I talk loud.
All right, cool.
So understand software reuse standardization and hardware reuse standardization. And you talked about data standardization. What does that look like as compared to the other?
Yes, if anybody didn't hear that, he's asking about data standardization.
Go to a System Link session for the demo and the Experience Lounge.
Go elsewhere. Okay.
I'm teasing.
No, but I mean, to that extent, so we're using System Link as a data standardization tool because from our perspective, like Joe said, it's about making it, unless it's you can turn your data into usable information, it doesn't matter. So we have a lot of data, we have a lot of different systems collecting data in a lot of different ways, and a lot of them no one even knows how to access, right? So if we can put it into a common source of truth, right, or data set that people can come to in a similar manner every time to gather that data. So we're creating a common API that says, okay, so all of our test data, it has to go into this one solution, and then anybody who wants data, this is how you access it. So by standardizing the types of data we collect, as well as the API to interface that data, we make it much more usable than it ever has been in the past.
How do you deal with new technology becoming a potential disruptor to your standardization process?
Okay, so the question was, how do we deal with new technology disrupting something we've standardized?
So I would say, so this is again where I think it goes back to what Nancy said earlier, of having your long-term objective. You don't necessarily map out your entire roadmap, right? You have a long-term objective, you know where you're at, you know the projects you're working on, and being agile in the projects you attack, right? You're reviewing how I get there every 6 months, every year, whatever it is, because things are changing, data came up. Maybe new technologies come up if you're talking hardware standardization, right? Oh, we got to have this because our products are now doing this new thing, right? So continually, not trying to map an entire roadmap, but just being kind of that agile process. Okay, these are the tasks that I'm going to work now, and then we go reevaluate what's the next set of tasks.
I have a quick one on that. And not every group needs to adopt the new thing. And there's at least one individual in this room and on this person's team, because of the context in which they work, they have to have things that last for many decades. And because of what they do, they don't have the freedom to turn around and go get System Link and System Link Enterprise and all these amazing things, that NI is coming out with. And they have a very successful standardization effort based on the technology that they started with about 8 or 9 years ago, and it continues to be successful. But they know that, and they are very cognizant of, we will be the late adopter. So once something is new for one team, they may be 10 years behind that new technology, and that's fine because given their context, it works for them. And so that's part of really like the future state and really understanding where you can plug those things in.
I think it came up yesterday too. I think the idea that the slightly different question, but it was around obsolescence, and the idea that that's where I think where that long-term vision comes in. That if you're thinking about the risk of obsolescence in that vision, then you can make small decisions that help make sure you're ready for that technology if it does come in. So that was something that we got to yesterday.
Josh has had his hand up
Yeah,
for a
that's
bit.
it.
We rarely start with a blank slate. We're often starting with a product that's well on its way. So how do you put your nuggets for different groups have different tools they want to use. There's lots of value they've created in time. The hardware group's done all of their hardware validation in LabVIEW. The firmware guys have done everything in C, and all the ML guys have written in Python. Pulling all that together under a common group. You guys have any suggestions for groups that are trying to put together an umbrella underneath with all of that kind of effort that's come along?
So just to summarize that question, basically, you're typically the current state is not a blank slate, right? You're walking into many different things, right? The lack of standardization, maybe that's a good way to start. So what do you guys think of a place to start?
So here's Josh, my snarky answer to that is get everybody together and go do a paintball war somewhere and get it out of their systems first. It depends. It comes back to the context around that and what is the end goal of that particular team, and are there reasons why they should be using Python? Are there tools that National Instruments may release at some point in time that allow for better integration of Python and LabVIEW? And are they hiring kids out of school that absolutely refuse to do LabVIEW? Are they hiring some interesting thinkers who are like, wow, LabVIEW, that graphical programming language, that is great because I remember and I can see things. And so it's a context thing is what I would say. But I would start with a paintball game.
A slightly snipey answer as well is System Link test stand. Problem solved.
You did not pay him to say that.
So I think furthering that, I would say that standard doesn't necessarily mean common, right? I don't have to have everybody doing the exact same thing top to bottom, right? I want to make standard architectures that allow for business decisions to be made, right? That allow for me to make decisions that make the most sense. So we may say these pieces have to be common because that's the goal, right? There, whatever my objective is, like my factory, my operator has to see the same thing every time he sits down. So that user interface, that's common. But what's underneath it? Test stand allows for a lot of that, right? By using a test stand based architecture, I can allow for a lot more variability under the hood and still maintain a standard.
Any other questions? Yeah, we got time for some more. Yeah.
So when you're standardizing like a hardware test rack, how do you make a standardized rack that can do everything you need it to do, but also avoid extra costs of having a loaded rack that maybe might only be using 50% of the application, 50% of for one application, but you need 75% of it for another application?
It's a good question. So the question is, hardware standardization, and actually that's a question we didn't answer about investment. But yeah, hardware standardization is potentially you might be buying more than you actually need, that you need for that application. So any thoughts?
So I would say, so for us, we have decided not to go to common test racks, common test systems. We have standard architectures. We do, common interconnect for an ITA, PC-based, Windows-based. We have these kind of architectures, and we provide recommended instrument lists to choose from. But we have such a varying product line, it would be a $20 million test station to be able to test everything. That just doesn't make sense for us. So we kind of choose how much standardization to do based on what we're trying to solve.
I think it's a good point too, because when I've heard of the hardware standardization efforts that have gone wrong, it's usually when they've gotten so focused on the tool, again, going back to our earlier conversation, that they're trying to, all right, we got to have this list rather than what's the vision, what are we actually trying to do with standardization? And so then it's like, well, maybe maybe that doesn't make sense. If somebody is in a more highly repetitive or there's the variability is less, well, then maybe that does. So, right, it's knowing yourself, right? You said that, and knowing the long-term vision. And then Nancy, you.
I'm going to add 2 cents to that too.
Yeah.
Since I'm a little verbose today, too much Diet Coke. Again, it depends on the situation. And, for those of you who are doing hardware in the loop, there's some really good solutions. Thank you, Tech 180, on being able to reduce the time to actually design and build your tester. That's one way of looking at it. I've seen some groups not build the one big monolithic tester, because I agree, Mike, I don't know of anyone who's been successful. I'm going to build the one tester that tests everything. But I have seen groups say, okay, regardless of what you're going to test, that you have 7 options, or let's call it 5 options. And you will use one of these 5 configurations for your tester. And you may use a configuration where you're only leveraging truly 50% of what it could do, or 70%. But by going down from hundreds of unique solutions down to we're always going to use these 5 common, that can save money for that particular organization in that context. So again, very, very context-centric and very important to be thinking about the hardware aspect of it.
I'll add something to that. An example, actually. We worked with a customer that went through acquiring another company along with all their test assets, and along with this acquisition came a lot of test assets. And the approach they took was kind of turn everything upside down and said, this is my test capability. Make sure you write all your test specs for this test capability. Anything outside of my test capability and my hardware is not allowed, right? That forced them to cover more in earlier stages before they got to mass production, maybe in design validation. But what scaled was only what test capability they had, and all the specs were written with that limitation in mind, limitation or maybe opportunity too. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Anything you guys want to add?
Got time for one more question. I see it, yep.
2.
So it's pretty common in aerospace and defense, but I think it occurs in other industries. There's the concept of colors of money, right? Different projects span different programs, and there's different program offices that control the money and the dollars budget for those, the test equipment for those projects. What guidance or advice can you offer to organizations that are looking to standardize across programs and thus have to deal with different colors of money?
So sorry, I should repeat the question. How do you standardize when, specifically when like funding sources are varied and in the case of like an ADG type of application where it's completely different programs, right? So they're very, very different. So how do you standardize across those programs?
No, this is my opportunity for a snarky comment, right? In the org chart, you're gonna find that node, the person who cares across those programs, right? Who's somehow budgeting for not just one program, but across. But it usually requires you to go up, and maybe you have to go up all the way up to CEO because somebody cares, right? Maybe lower level, they just care about their programs, but maybe you have to go up and up and up until you find a node that cares.
So being ADG, there's no easy answer to that question. Customers trump anything we're trying to do, right? Ultimately, if they put in a contract and they say you have to follow this process, you have to do this type of solution, it's over, right? So we try to, by having the way we approach it is for capital efforts, self-invested efforts. This is the way we do things. We standardize on capital efforts, and then we take that to programs during the proposal phase and say, this is how we want to run this program. And we cross our fingers and hope they buy in. But yes, there's always a caveat when it comes to dealing with those kind of customers.
And it's definitely an incremental process. And it's one of the things we haven't talked about yet is, Mike, when is your standardization effort done? It's an ongoing continuous improvement. And so I've seen times where, yes, there's a lot of times it has to come out of capital budget. And then I don't know all the details of how you guys get money and who gets money and how all that works, but it is going to be incremental over time due to that. And it also emphasizes the importance of delivering value initially.
Right.
And having a plan to follow, because all of a sudden, oh crap, we got an extra, $250,000. What are we going to do with it? And be ready to do something with it. But that's me as the observer. I'm not deep into
I agree
it.
with all that. Yeah.
Not like that it's incremental, right? At the end of the day, it's realizing that it's still worth going after. It's just maybe that it takes longer.
Smaller steps along the way.
Right.
There was another question which we actually had time for, I think. Is there one?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Okay, so the whole conversation was quite abstract and theoretical, so I would love to hear some examples maybe. So what was your most genius idea to achieve a goal? Or would you say that there is no need to have some genius idea because the standardization process is quite straightforward, systematic, and just hard work.
So let me that was not planned, but this was my last question. I've been at the conference. It's Monday morning. Like, man, I've got all these great ideas about test standardization. Where do I start? Right? I think this is a great test or seed that conversation. So
I would say harness the creativity of your team. That team that you have. You don't have to have the brilliant person. You don't have to have this, and it shouldn't be boring, systematic stuff. Harness the creativity of your team. So as a little side gig, I sometimes speak on creativity. And one of the things that I learned along the way is whenever we have a creative idea and it fits in with something else as we're kind of building out our standardization effort, guess what? We get a dopamine hit. We have that aha moment. It's like, wow, this is what's going to work. So if we look at it as this is a creative endeavor, let's as a team creatively go solve this problem. So that would be my 2 cents.
I suppose from my own experience, because I work in R&D, and we're passing tools and different libraries and things on to the manufacturing stage, it's important for us to have even a basic proof of concept ready. And it helps to force standardization. From my own experience, I was able to build up a big PXI rack that was able to do everything we needed at the validation stage, and just be able to turn to manufacturing and say, hey, it's done. If you want to take it on, it might be a little bit more expensive, but everything's done. It's packaged. It's ready to go.
Yeah, I come back to the really trying to understand yourself, trying to understand where your pain points are, know who your internal customers are, whatever those pain points are, and figuring out what is going to give you that return on investment and get you that buy-in to kind of build that momentum as you kind of head down that path.
Yeah.
Very good. That's it for today, guys. Thank you for joining us.
¿Dónde está mi gente que entiende lo que yo digo? La nota se está caliente como se vende.